Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 107, noes 1.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 4981A, Calendar 540. Mrs. Robinson, an act to amend the banking law.
The bill is laid aside.
Assembly 5548, Calendar 541. Mr. Sepulveda, an act to amend the executive law.
The bill is laid aside.
Assembly 6932A, Calendar 542. Ms. Weinstein, an act establishing the New York State Abandoned Property Neighborhood Relief Act of 2016.
The bill is laid aside.
Assembly 7055, Calendar 543. Ms. Rosenthal, an act to amend the mental hygiene law.
The bill is laid aside.
Assembly 7514, Calendar 544. Mr. Buchwald, an act to amend the executive law.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 93, noes 7.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 7759, Calendar 545, Mr. Dillon, an act to amend the not-for-profit corporation law.
The bill is laid aside.
Assembly 7887, Calendar 546, Mr. Pichardo, an act to amend the public service law.
The bill is laid aside.
Assembly 8182, Calendar number 547, Ms. Titus, an act to amend the social services law.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect January 1st.
The clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 105, noes 0.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing a brief interruption so that we might let the members of the Ways and Means Committee know that Mr. Farrell awaits them in the Speaker's conference room. Ways and Means in the Speaker's conference room.
Ways and Means Speaker's Conference Room.
Assembly 8607, Calendar 548. Mr. McDonald, an act to amend Chapter 105 of the laws of 2009.
The bill is laid aside. Ladies and gentlemen, we are having a hard time hearing the bills and the lay-asides. Shh, please.
Assembly 8659, Calendar 549. Mr. Pretlow, an act to amend the local finance law.
Read the last section. Home rule message is at the desk. Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. The death.
Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 98, noes 0.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 9118, Calendar 550. Mr. Buchwald, an act to amend the education law.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect January 1st.
The clerk will record the votes. The vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 95, noes 0.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker, for the opportunity to briefly interrupt for a very special introduction. A distinguished jurist has joined us in the chamber from the Bronx on behalf of Mr. Crespo, the Speaker, Mr. Sepulveda, Mr. Rivera, and other members of the Bronx delegation. We have the Supreme Court Judge Fernando Tapia, who is joined by his lovely wife, Carmen. They've joined us in the chamber to observe our proceedings this afternoon, and we certainly want to extend all the cordialities and greetings to this fine New York jurist.
Okay. On behalf of the Bronx delegation, the Speaker, and all the members, we welcome this distinguished jurist to the chamber, extend the privileges of the floor, and hope you enjoy the proceedings. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. If we can now go to page 19 of the main calendar, we're going to take up calendar number 254 by Mr. Crespo.
The clerk will read.
Assembly 6731, Calendar 254, Mr. Crespo, an act to amend the general business law.
An explanation has been requested.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This legislation would extend price gouging protections to medications that are listed by the FDA as in short supply. The bill is the same as we have passed over the last few years in this chamber, and unlike its first iteration, this legislation does not allow for private right of action, but rather actions commenced by the Attorney General.
Mr. McKevitt.
Sure. Will the sponsor yield for a few questions, please?
Sure.
The sponsor yields.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that first point, that in a previous version of this bill, it allowed a private right of action, but the way the bill has been redrafted, it's the jurisdiction exclusively of the Attorney General to go and bring these type of actions, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the penalty he may bring and seek in the court, I believe, is something along the lines of $100,000 for that type of violation, correct?
That's correct.
Correct. Just to really backtrack as to where the root of this bill goes to, this bill is designed, as indicated by your bill, a drug subject to a shortage. So if there's indeed some sort of shortage and you have a manufacturer raising up the price to an unconscionable level, the purpose of this is to really go and tell the manufacturer this is really preying on people in need, and therefore this is behavior which should not be condoned. Is that really the purpose behind it?
Yes, I wouldn't limit it to the manufacturer. I think the bill allows for consideration along that supply chain, but taking into account all of the pricing dynamics that may influence change in price. So we're not suggesting that any time there's an increase in a particular medication, but only in instances where that particular drug is listed as in short supply, it's not available in the general market. We believe that, or seen instances, and there was a report put out that alluded to great market vendors who have picked up a lot of this medication and then sold it at 1,000-fold its original price to hospitals or doctors' offices or patients, putting in the meanwhile putting lives at risk. So this would allow for those dynamics to be taken into consideration before an action could be commenced, but where there is a clear price gouging taking place, that the Attorney General would be the sole individual responsible for bringing that action.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned before, the purpose is not only against necessarily the manufacturer, but I guess you can say either a distributor or a pharmacist who also goes and unconsciously raises the price. They could also be subject to liability under this bill as well, correct?
Potentially, yes.
If you could just actually turn to page 2 of the bill, and when you look at lines 9 through 14, it talks about the situation whereby the amount charged grossly exceed the price due to a shortage readily attainable by other purchasers in the trade area. And I'm wondering if you could tell me what exactly is meant by the trade area of a drug.
I want to say that that is the wherever pricing dynamics take a geographic zone into consideration, whether it's a city, whether it's medications that are sold to a particular county health system. In New York City, we had asked what has happened to New York Health and Hospitals Corporation when they purchase drugs for their various hospitals in their system, and they have been subjected to these conditions in different occasions. So I believe that that is referring to prices that are negotiated and or expected given a particular type of customer, given a zone.